Tonight, we are going to be talking about electric fence basics. This is really something I've just pulled together, mostly geared towards people who are new to electric fence to give a full picture. Specific tips and tricks, I might mention a few along the way, but there are so many when it comes to electric fence that that's something that is really very specific to a circumstance. So it's going to be quite a broad overview. So first, we're going to look at how an electric fence works. There's an electrical side to that for sure, and also a very important psychological side. We'll go through all the components, energizers, the conductors, that's the hot wire where the electricity goes down, insulators, ground rods, little things like switches, very important, testers to make sure it's working. We'll look at lightning diverters, which I think is a component that often gets missed in certain areas that are prone to lightning. There's a lot more components than just that. We'll touch on a few. It's very important to make sure it works. So testing that hot and ground, we're going to really look into, and various ways to train animals. Those are very important components because it is a psychological barrier, not just a physical barrier. And we'll look at some options so that we can talk about maybe turkeys and bobcats, which I've never really considered before. I've had other animals I'm trying to keep out. And really that's what a fence is all about. It's to keep some animals in and some animals out. Why electric fence? Well, it's very effective, I find. I've had great success with electric fence. I've also had great failures, and the failures are usually my fault and not the fence's fault. And so really that's something that we're going to look into. I find them very inexpensive. They're low labor. They're easy to install. Generally, they have very few materials and very simple materials relative to a physical fence. They're very flexible. You can customize them easily. You can retrofit. You can add lines. You can move things around. It's very easy to fix them. They're portable and lightweight when you need that, or they can be permanent and strong when you need that. This picture here is actually, there's my dad fixing up my perimeter fence, which we built over the COVID year there. It was a good opportunity to stick it in. Super cheap and easy. Cattle panel on the bottom, held up by T-posts. Wooden 2x2s with screw-in insulators and some hot wires on the top. Very easy to put in, and we'll see some pictures of that. I don't recommend this. I just found it very easy to put in and relatively inexpensive. You can kind of fake anything you want, is my point, not copy my fence. Typical costs. One of the things I love about electric fence is it's really inexpensive. So this is from some analysis I did where I really went through all the costs on a few different people's fences and kind of came up with these rules of thumb. They're very broad rules of thumb. There can be a lot of variation here. But in general, a 4-strand barbed wire fence is going to, be $350, $450 a foot. And a 4-strand electric fence using fiberglass posts and maybe high tensile or poly wire is going to be about half of that cost. And I would argue more effective. Why would you not want a fence? Well, there are cases when you don't want a fence. So I don't want to be an electric fence evangelist. First, you always have to be checking, is it working? If you're not checking if it's working, it might not be working. And then it doesn't work. There can be maintenance. I'm going to talk about maintenance. That's where these pictures come in. Like you got to keep, snow loads can sag things, which cause problems. Weeds can crawl up and short your fence out. That causes problems. There are safety issues. Animals can get caught in a fence. It's very, very important as a livestock owner or just keeping wildlife out to really think like an animal and keep safety in mind. So this is something I'm going to bring up over and over. Sparks could catch fire. I'll cover that in a second. If you have a pacemaker or an ICD, got electrical components that are helping to keep you healthy, I think you should talk to your doctor before you put in an electric fence. I don't know. I've been laid flat on my back by my fence when it's firing at 9,000 volts. And it's not pleasant. And I don't know. I'm told that the frequencies aren't going to cause any trouble, but I would still check. There's also a public perception. I live right on a rail grade here, which is a very frequently traversed area. Lots of animals, like dog walkers and people. It's very visible. And I have had encounters with the public where they're upset with electric fence. And so that is a communication issue. And so that's where I'm going to get to in a sec. I should mention here, classic, the tree fell on the fence here and I forgot to take the before picture. I did get the after picture. It was about 2 hours of chainsawing. But here, the beauty of the repair, fixing the fence was just pushing some metal back into shape, pulling the wire back up and tensioning it. It took about 10 minutes to fix the fence. All of those problems are mostly fixed with design and proper testing. And public perception is really about communication, talking with people, being friendly, making some compromise. That's one of the reasons I have a physical fence on the bottom and hot wires at the top. The dogs go up to the physical fence. The wires are up there to stop raccoons climbing over and bears and this kind of thing. Don't electrify barbed wire. That's another good one. That's a really bad idea. I like my electric fence to look like an electric fence for one, and you don't want somebody to get caught on it. That is how an animal will die, is getting caught in the fence and then getting shocked over and over. It would be a terrible way to go. This is a very nice little piece of equipment, and I'll talk about it again. It blinks when it's hot. That's a really good way to know if your fence is working. I like mine sitting where I can see it from the kitchen window. So sparks, fire, this may have concerned you. I think that it's a very low risk. I've been using electric fence for 14, 15 years, often making it look just like this fence, right through the weeds. I do a lot of that kind of thing. I've had shorts, it's been sparking in dry conditions. And here's the thing. They spark most when there's wet weeds on it, and those aren't going to light. It's green, wet, sappy material. When you do have a spark that could light something, it's because there's a short circuit on metal. Usually because you've got some kind of sag, it's touching a T-post, an insulator broke, and there is a spark. You're going to hear a click. You will always hear a click. And you can often hear it when there's a big spark. You can hear it a long way off, hundreds of feet away. So just walk your fence line with some regularity and listen to the clicks. They're going to be a small click before it's a big click. Once you have some kind of sparking action, there will be an arc. You just fix it. It takes seconds. You just have the bits with you. You can tie a knot. You can bridge it. The problem would be is if you had dry vegetation leaning right over the place where it also happened to have a spark. The chances of those two things happening, especially if you keep the vegetation off your fence, is very low. The willow, the electric fence is like the willow that bends in the storm. Very easy to fix. Here, just sawing the tree was the hard part. Setting up the fence was a matter of seconds. And there's the opportunity. I've always loved this. That tree knocked down a maple, and about 100 feet away, it completely destroyed the temporary shelter my goats were in. Luckily, none of them got hurt, and they instantly saw the opportunity and climbed into the branches and ate the leaves. How does an electric fence work? It is a physical barrier. There does have to be something there, but it's often very light. And when I first started doing fences in my area 14 years ago, I got a lot of people who said, that just won't work against a bear. They'll just go right through it. It's too thin. Well, that's because it's a psychological, mental barrier. And it's that electricity that is really, really key. So we're going to talk about how the electricity works, and we're also going to think about how our minds work. It's very important that we have both of those in mind to get our electric fence to work. The electricity is a short, sharp pulse. It just goes click, click, click. The energy builds, and then it's released in an instant. It builds and it releases. It's capacitors in there or something. It's very, very low current. Oh, I wrote high amps. It's low current, that's low amps, and high volts. I'll have to change that. And we will go through the electricity in more detail in a second. The psychological aspect is that it's a pain barrier, a mental barrier. First, the animal or the human experiences pain. From that pain, there is a fear, a desire to avoid that pain, and it builds a habit. Getting it to be habitual is what's important. It's all about the training. I have electric fence PTSD. I have been shocked hundreds of times, usually through stupidity. And I have a major, major twitch anytime I go near an electric fence. I don't want to be anywhere near it. Even if I'm sure it's off, I still worry that it's not off. This is the kind of animal brain that you get around an electric fence, and it's why it works. So it has to be hot the first time an animal touches the fence. So the first time you set up your fence is the most important time for it to be hot, to have it perfect. Set up your fence perfectly the first time. It has to hurt the first time. It also has to hurt the second time in case they come back. After that, it becomes less important for it to hurt, actually. I've seen fences be completely off and still work for a time, but I've been keeping goats for 14 years, and let me tell you, they will eventually test it again, so best to have it on all the time. This is a really good indicator that it's worked for a bear. You will see that when you set up your fence. They'll drop a big one. It has to be safe. So while it hurts, it has to be in a safe environment. So when you're training livestock, there are many different strategies to make it safe. Like you have them in an enclosed area that's already physically enclosed, and maybe just put the strand somewhere. They will encounter it, they will experience pain, but they will still be in their safe place. They'll just be looking over and thinking, what the heck was that? They might try it a couple more times, and pretty soon they're going to see that it's consistently this white and black thread that's hurting them, and they're going to stop wanting to touch it. That's the basics of training. It's got to be in a safe place. You're not trying to cause any kind of trauma. It's just a pain that lasts for a split second, and you feel it. We got a charger over here. It's a plug-in charger. There's wires going to ground rods. It's all connected. All these white lines are insulated cables. We'll see pictures of this in a second. Here's a switch. It's kind of handy to have a switch, especially if this is a long way. If this is like way out in the field, it's nice to have a switch to turn the fence on and off when you want to crawl under or fix something. There's insulated cable holding the connecting all the hot wires, which are these red wires, and they're on some kind of insulated post, or at least they're on insulators that are keeping them off the post. That insulation is very, very key. So this is the basic setup. It's clicking away, sending out pulses down that hot wire. So here we've hung a little bit of a tuna lid, maybe dripping with tuna grease on the fence, and sure enough, a bear is attracted, comes on up, takes a little sniff, and bang, right on the nose. In all the time I've done electric fence, I've never been shocked on the nose. I've been shocked a bunch of different places, but never the nose. I don't wish it on anybody. No wonder they don't come back. It's probably very bad. It goes right through the nose, right down into the legs, and that shock comes all the way back to the ground rods and up into the ground rods and completes the circuit back to ground. So this is the circuit. The circuit comes in a hot wire, and you are completing the circuit when you touch the fence. You are like a light switch, turning on when you touch the fence and off when you aren't touching the fence. Remember, it's also coming in a pulse. So if you just grab the fence and let go quickly, you might not get it, or you might just get it. You've got to hold it for a solid second or two, and then the pulse is going to get you. So that is it. You are a light switch, and that is the circuit. People often wonder if you need to complete the circuit of the hot wires. Like, do the hot wires have to be in a loop? Absolutely not. The hot wires can go off and end in way at the back of the field. They don't need to be connected in a loop at all. The circuit is you connecting the loop through the ground. So this is the heart of the operation. It's the Energizer. Bigger is better, and bigger is in terms of joules. A lot of times these get marketed in terms of fence length. Sure, the longer fence you have, the more joules you need to push through that fence, but there's a lot of other factors at play here. What type of fence? What's the resistance in that fence? How good is your grounding? How much weed load is there? What kind of animals are you trying to keep out? You will find that your experience and your environment has a bigger role than fence length. So I wouldn't pay attention to fence length. What I would do is pay attention to your pocketbook and decide how high you can go. Because if at a certain point, bigger is better. If you've got more joules, the only expense to you will be needing a bigger grounding system. And often the bigger chargers, the bigger energizers, have a way that you can dial back the power or have it on half power. So I would buy the biggest energizer that you think you might need. And as a rough rule of thumb, if you're putting in, say, a backyard, you'll only need maybe a half joule or 1 joule. I did, for years, I did about an acre of netting with a 1.5 joule charger. If you're doing 5 acres, kind of mixed, a bit of netting, a bit of strands here and there, maybe you don't want to worry too much about the weeds. You'd like enough power for it to push through the weeds, as I do, because I'm a bit lazy that way. Then maybe you want something up to 6 joules. And certainly, as soon as I do have an 18 joule on a relatively small space, and 18 joules is probably good for single strands up to 100 acres or even bigger. But they do make energizers bigger. I just wouldn't shy away from going big. It's a good time thinking about energizers to talk about electricity and what's going on here. What we want on the fence is a high voltage, and that's potential energy. You can think of voltage as like the height of a waterfall. So here, this is like a high voltage, low flow situation. It's just a little trickle of a waterfall. Well, I guess it's a lot bigger. It's just from a distance, but imagine that it's just a little trickle of a waterfall coming over from a very great height. That great height is your voltage. That's what we're looking at in an electric fence, is a lot of voltage and a very, very low flow. The flow is the current. So here we've got a very high flow, low voltage situation, low height. So while there isn't a lot of potential energy, there's a whole heck of a lot of water coming over this weir. This is what will kill you. This is going to drown you a lot more than this will. So current is what kills. Think of it that way. Current and continuous current is also what kills. That's what will hold you. A strong current that is continuous and doesn't relent is what will electrocute people. And it's not that situation at all in a fence. It's a short, sharp pulse with a high voltage and a low current. A few other concepts to keep in mind. Resistance. This is kind of like the rocks on the bottom of the river causing friction, or maybe as the water comes over the waterfall, the air resistance slowing it down, reducing the punch that it has. When we're thinking of a fence, resistance comes into play in the conductors. You want your conductors to be low resistance. Watts, this is the power. This is what you need to think of in terms of how much energy you're going to use. People often worry that an electric fence uses a lot of power. It actually doesn't use very much at all, and we'll show you that in just a second. And energy is the watts multiplied by the time. Put another way, a watt is a joule per second. So it's a certain amount of energy that is flowing along. So the power is a rate of energy transfer. That's getting less important to understand. What's really important to understand is that you want a high voltage. And it is important to know how much power you're using. About the power of an LED bulb, it's really amazing how little power it uses. And it's, again, because it just takes this little bit of energy, it builds it up, and it sends it out in a very, very, very short pulse of very high voltage. You'll often hear about energizers being low impedance. Most new energizers are low impedance. I don't know what it has to do with impedance or why they call it low impedance, but what is important to understand is that it increases the power output as necessary to maintain power in the fence. So let's say weeds are growing on your fence and your grounding system has deteriorated a little because it's a bit dry. The energizer will actually increase its power output to compensate so that you will still have a functional fence. Should you use solar? I hear this a lot, and I always say no. I don't smash it. I've used solar for years. I did a lot of grazing on leased properties where I didn't have an option. And if you don't have an option, it's the best option. It's great. It's still worth having a solar electric fence if that's what you have to use. But if you don't have to, I would much prefer to live without batteries, without a solar panel, and no moving the ground rod around. For example, with this charger, this little 3-foot ground rod was always insufficient. I needed several ground rods to match the power of the fence, but that would have been too much work and moving it all the time. Plug-in chargers have a faster pulse. They're less maintenance. I would really recommend that. If you do need a solar charger and you're tired of moving the ground rods around, one thing I do recommend is putting in a decent grounding system with multiple rods and running cable instead of moving your ground rods around. Just follow your charger around with a long cable. While we're talking about cable or wire, you want to get special insulated cable that is designed for high voltage, that's designed for an electric fence. You don't want to just use house wire. The insulation isn't enough to keep that high voltage from bridging, and you might feel some tingles through that regular wire. There is a difference between cable and solid wire. Cable is sort of braided or twisted, and I often use that when I need to be using my hands to do tying. So when I'm tying wires on with my hands, I use that kind of cable. Solid wire carries the electricity a bit better. It's harder to use. You have to use pliers, and it's a little tougher to tie knots and to twist things. It's usually, though, what is used for high tensile fences and more permanent fixtures. I find that the stranded cable tends to deteriorate over time, and I do have to make it part of my regular maintenance, is going around and replacing old cables. Double insulated, there's single and double. Double insulated is probably the way to go most of the time. It's a lot bulkier and stiffer. Use single if you have something lightweight that you need. They both work fine. Double for sure if you're burying it. Switches, get good ones. I have a lot of switches like this. I've used these kinds of switches for years, and I have been shocked by them a lot. When conditions are wet, when I'm in my bare feet, and I'm holding onto this little yellow thing, I have a feeling that there's just not quite enough insulation in that little yellow thing, and I end up closing that switch really fast. I would like to switch to better switches, and these ones might be the ticket. I would just get a good one. Get one that's got good reviews. Here you can actually see the power. The hot is coming up over from the charger. It ties in here, and then it ties in here with another insulated cable and over to the fence, and the fence strands are linked. And you can see that there's actually nice tensioners on this poly rope. So when you close this switch, it connects these two, and the pulse is able to traverse into the fence. That's how it goes. So conductors, this is the actual wire, the hot wire that is on the fence. How high do we put these? It's often a question. I think like the animal. You have to think about how big the animal is. You don't want them to be able to squeeze through. You particularly don't want their head to squeeze through. When animals get shocked on the back of their head, their instinct tends to be to go forward. You'd really like them to be shocked in their front somewhere. Nose height is an obvious thing. I actually literally get down on all fours and think like the animal, and will try and pretend like the animal and set things according to the animal. So it's really about understanding animal behavior. Really, there's only one rule, is insulate extremely well. The worst fences out there are because there's some kind of short. You can't just use, wood is not a good insulator on its own. You have to put actual plastic insulators into the wood to keep them off the wood. I've seen plenty of electric fences on wood. They just are not very strong, and a not very strong fence will not hurt very much. And if it doesn't hurt much, an animal will go right through. Here's just what some insulators look like. I quite like ones that I can screw in very quickly. You can put this in the chuck of a drill and drill it right in. It goes very quickly. You can attach them to T-posts. You can attach them to any kind of fence. There's a million kinds of insulator out there. I just encourage you to think about what your situation is and look through the catalog. Lots of conductor. One of the first that you'll probably encounter is smooth high tensile wire. This stuff's great. The 170,000 PSI stuff at 12.5 gauge is a bit more flexible. You can hand tie it. I haven't used it a lot myself. I had a great workshop I attended where these guys are able to put in fiberglass posts very, very quickly and set up high tensile fences using ingenious log brace fence posts that are, it's just very fast, very easy. I'm not very good at it. I would really recommend going to a workshop to learn how to do that kind of thing. You will need a spinning jenny to undo the wire. I don't like smooth wire much because I find that it's difficult to use relative to polywire. Polywire I can literally tie in knots, and I can use, you know, a fisherman's knot when I've got a when there's a break. I can tie things together very easily. I love this stuff. I use it a lot. I like that it's visible. And one of the problems with the smooth wire is it's not very visible, and it doesn't have that it doesn't shout "I'm an electric fence" in the same way that this stuff does. There's a lot of this on the market, and what I would look for when you're comparing brands is the ohms, that resistance rating. This stuff is very low resistance. It's got steel, I believe it's steel, wrapped inside, and this is the conductor inside the nylon braid. And the higher the quality of this conductor in here, the lower the ohms, and you want that. Otherwise, your fence is going to require a lot more power. It's going to sap energy. It's not going to get the punch way out far on your fence if you've got a high resistance wire. So the cheaper stuff tends to be high resistance. There's all kinds of portable netting. Now this is really what I have used a lot because it's what works in my situation. I have very uneven terrain, very random places, and I'm usually trying to keep in poultry and goats and keep out a whole list of animals. And netting is the kind of one size fits all. This is my all-purpose net. I use this for goats. It keeps out dogs and coyotes and bears and skunks and raccoons. It keeps everybody out. Doesn't keep the chickens in and out because chickens have feathers and they've got these bony little feet, and between their feet and the feathers they're extremely well insulated and difficult to shock. I find my chickens, I need it hot for them to work, and I need it to be more of a physical fence so that they can't actually get through. If you have this, the chickens soon enough will learn that if they go quick, they don't get the shock. Chickens are a lot smarter than we give them credit for. On the other end of the spectrum, this is a very widely spaced netting. It's specifically for deer. What's nice about it is it goes up very quickly. It's got nice long lengths, and I used this around a half-acre garden for 3 years to keep deer out, and it was fantastic. Did a great job. You do have to make sure that bottom wire is low enough that the deer can't do the little crawl under. And as long as that's there, you're good to go. You can always add another wire on the bottom if you were having a crawling problem. And in fact, if you were feeling pretty DIY, you could probably make these yourself for a lot less than the cost of one of these, but it's pretty convenient when you get it in a nice roll. They come in sort of 150-foot lengths. I wouldn't recommend the 150-footers. Those are really difficult to manage. I have them, I use them. I don't like it. I would recommend single spike for most of this stuff, unless you've got a really wide spaced out fence that's going in for the whole season. I use double spikes for them. Ground rods. This is the #1 place that fences get messed up, is in their grounding system. You really need to be able to have a superior grounding system for your fence to work. It's going to stop working when it rains and it's wet, and all the wet vegetation, even small amounts of it, will drag your fence down in terms of its voltage. You really need a good grounding system because that's completing the circuit. If you don't have enough ground, the electricity is trying to get back in it, and it has like a traffic jam as it tries to complete the circuit. And it'll actually build up charge around the ground rods, and we're going to look at that in a moment when we talk about testing your grounding system, which is an important sort of annual task, and certainly when you're first putting up the fence. As a rule of thumb, for every, I'd start with at least 3 feet in the ground. 6 feet is probably a better minimum. And then you want to add 3-foot length of ground rod for every jewel thereafter. More is better. If you've got dry ground, add more. If you've got any kind of concern, just add more. It won't go wrong. You can't have too many ground rods. In general, if they're 3 foot deep, then make them 5 feet apart. And if they're 6 feet deep, you want to make them 10 feet apart. You're making an array that the electricity is going to come back. You can think of it like a radio array catching that underground electrical signal. If you have extremely rocky ground or frozen ground, you can do a hot ground or positive negative fence. I have never used them. I don't I don't like them for a few reasons. One, you can get positive negative netting fences, but those will spark. If the fence fell down, you might get a lot more sparking on the ground, which, as I said, could be a fire risk. So I don't like it for the netting. I worry also about they have to be close enough together because the animal actually has to touch both wires at the same time to get a shock. So if this is your grounding system, if you just touch the hot wire, you are not going to get a shock, or you'll only get the shock based on the underground. I'm sure it works great for a lot of people. I just don't have a lot of experience with it. So let's put it that way. Somebody who has experience, and if it's worked well, please let me know.
When it's really, really dry, stand on the ground, you can touch the fence and hold it, and it won't even do anything to you, even with the good ground, because the ground is just so dry. So at that time, I switch over to alternating hot and cold. And the other thing is when it's lots of snow on the ground, it shorts out the bottom wire. Once again, going to alternate in the when there's a snow load is also beneficial. This time of year, I'm doing all of it's hot, and then I switch over when it's dry and in the middle of winter.
Great, thanks, Frank. Yeah, those are certainly the situations that one uses alternating hot ground. I also have it very dry and rocky where I am. I've always just found if I add enough more ground rods that it starts working again. Another trick with my drip system, I'll make sure that my drip lines are on the ground system as well. I will usually place my ground rods along a permanent fence line or around a building. And again, that's another great place to put your ground rods, is where there's going to be extra moisture in the ground, maybe because water coming off of the roof or because of your irrigation system. But yeah, if it's really dry and it's pure rock, or when there's solid frozen ground in the winter, your regular grounding system will not work. And I have a very similar approach to the alternating hot ground that'll show in a minute. It's basically having your metal fences attached to your ground, and that's essentially the same idea as an alternating hot ground. So thanks very much for that, Frank. Testing your fence is a daily duty. This I cannot overstate, especially when you're new to fencing. You got to have that tester in your back pocket, and you don't want to just test it back close to the charger. You want to test it far away. You want to test it on that, just like Frank's doing there. You want to make sure that you're testing it when you're up on that rocky hill, down where it's really dry and dusty. You want to go around and test the fence a bunch of different places, especially when you first put it in. You will want something that blinks at you. Now, I showed you that other blinker. This is actually the one that I have. You attach this end to the fence and this end down into the ground. And when it has more than 4,000 volts coming through, this lights up. And you can see it from a long way away at night, which is a great time, because that's usually when I wake up in a sweat thinking, did I turn the fence back on? And have to run to the window, and then I just see that there's a light blinking. I also set up my fence so that I have a light at the beginning of the fence, and it goes all the way around the perimeter of the farm, so that I have the furthest part of the fence actually also very close to the house. And there's a light on that one too. Because sometimes you will have a decent charge at the beginning of the fence, but then something has happened way out on the fence line, and by the time it comes back, there's no charge anymore. So if you've got one light blinking and the other light not, that's usually a good indicator that you've got some problem on your fence line. So that's a design system that I've used. I could have linked both ends and then it would be a loop, but I like them being separate so that I know what is happening at the end of the fence, and the end of the fence is close to me. This is about as simple as they get, is a light, just the light tester. Depending on how many volts, you get a certain number of lights light up. You can also get a fancier one like this. I used this for years. This is me 12 years ago. This works fine. But I did end up liking to be just pushing a button and touching the fence and getting a number. The other beauty on this one is if you have the right charger, you can turn off the fence and turn it back on again at a push of a button. Very, very handy feature. Now, I just saw this. They have testers that link to cell towers, apparently for no subscription fee, so that you can have it on your phone. If you're in cell service, this could be an interesting answer. Here's how you test ground. You want to short out your fence. So you wait till there's dry conditions. I don't know why about that. That is just some advice that I've read and I'm parroting. I have done this in wet and dry conditions, and it works both ways. We put metal posts on the fence so that you are shorting it out. So you go somewhere far away from where your charger and your grounding system is. You go far out there and you lean metal posts, and the charge goes down and it goes into the ground and comes back. You want to have it so that the fence is down to 1,000 volts or less. You really want to suck that fence dry all into the ground. So now you got a ton of, all the power is in the ground. You go to the grounding rods and you test the ground rods. If there is a charge on the ground rod, then you need more ground rods. You should really be reading 0 here. What's happening is charge is piling up around. And I learned this the hard way in a rainstorm once, where the wet vegetation was effectively grounding out the fence, and I got shocked by my grounding system. So that's also one way that you can find out. If you're getting shocked by your ground, it means you don't have enough ground rods. Here's another way that you can get shocked by your fence and wonder why. And this has also happened to me. If you have insulated wires running alongside a metal fence or a metal wire, you can actually, magnetic induction can actually create a current in the metal wire that can shock you. And you'll feel a shock, you'll feel a tingle off of the wire. And it's very surprising to get this from a non-electric fence. The solution is easy. Just ground that, drive in a ground stake. Let's say it's a metal fence that's shocking you. Drive in a ground stake and ground out that fence, and then the charge will drop to the ground and you won't feel it anymore. It's very same physics. Same physics as with a, that's why I put this picture in, with an overhead power line inducing electrical current in rail lines or in pipelines. So let's picture this homestead. Few images here. Let's say we got an apple tree. We're trying to keep the bears off. We've got a compost, trying to keep the dog out of it. Neighborhood dog keeps coming, digging through your compost. And raccoons maybe are coming into the chickens. And you've got this metal fence around the chickens, but that's not keeping out anything. They will just climb right up and over. So what are we going to do? Put on some hot wires. All kinds of ways you can do it. You could maybe screw on or nail on insulators around your compost. Over here, maybe some fiberglass rods around the tree, or maybe this is some netting. Here again, maybe you've put some insulators on your T-posts, or some other way that you've got some wire along. Here's how I do gates. You know, you just put some wire on the gates and bring over an insulated cable to attach it to the main system. And then this hot cable is coming in from your charger somewhere. That's it. You know, now you just go around, test it, make sure it's working. Here is what we were talking about just a moment ago, is you can now attach a ground cable coming from the ground and attach it to your metal fence. Now your metal fence is grounded out. And this is going to be very helpful in the winter. It's helpful at any time of the year, but it's especially helpful in the winter when your ground system is no longer working and because the ground is frozen. When the ground is frozen, it's an insulator, and the charge can't go through it anymore. So at this point, as that snow crawls up and up, you'll probably want to disconnect any hot wires that are down below here before the snow gets on them. And you've got to watch out for snow bridging. This is something that can happen on paws and egg fences as well as on this kind of fence. When snow bridges your hot wire to the fence, it can carry a current there too. So you want to turn off anything that's going to be covered in snow. Sure enough, there comes that raccoon, climbs up the fence, and since they're touching the metal fence and their nose touches the hot wire, goes right through their nose, into their paws, into the metal fence, down the metal fence, and out through the ground cable all the way back to the Energizer. Lightning diverters. I learned this the hard way. For years, I put in lightning diverters, and then when I moved to a place where I am now a few years ago, this was maybe 6 years ago, there's so many things going on. I was like, you know what? We've never been hit by lightning. I don't need to put in a lightning diverter. And lightning storm hit the fence, and I tell you, came all the way back into the sub panel. Luckily, it's a sub panel, and I had sparks and flames coming out of outlets in the house. You don't want that to happen. You want to catch that lightning and direct it to the ground. Now, Plug-in chargers, the one strike against them relative to solar, they are 3 times more likely than solar chargers to get struck by lightning. For whatever reason, they are lightning attractants. And even a solar charger is going to attract lightning. So if you don't want to blow up your solar panels, protect it too. They all do much the same thing. Your hot wire has to come into this coily thing or something like it and go back out to the fence. If lightning hits the fence, that charge is going to come in here and hopefully jump this little gap here and go down, because there's going to be so much power in there. It's just going to jump across here and get diverted to this separate ground system. So I've got some diagrams to show you what that looks like. So here you go. Lightning is striking the fence, and it's going to go along the fence, and here it comes to the lightning diverter, and it sees ground here. Oh, it really wants to go to ground. That's all the lightning wants to do. So it jumps that little gap and goes down. And what's important is that these ground rods are a separate grounding system that's just as big as this ground system. You don't want to cheat the lightning. It wants a nice, decent sized ground system. Give it a good ground system that's a long way away. And sure enough, that's what'll happen. Knock on wood, haven't had any lightning issues since. I don't know if I've been struck. I've not always been around for the lightning storms. The only other alternative would be to turn off. So here's a basic setup. If you don't have a lightning diverter, there's an extension cord going out to the shed. There's your charger that you've got plugged into your extension cord, and some ground rods. It's just a little one, like it's a 1.5 joule, say. So you got 3 little 3-foot ground rods around your shed. And out goes the hot wires, and it hooks up around your trees and around your compost. That's great. And if lightning threatens, I'd recommend turning off, unplugging your charger. What you might find then is it's no longer a lightning attractant. That's the thing. When lightning does strike, if it makes it back to the charger, what happened in my case, I was lucky, it just blew it blew fuses in the charger that I was able to replace in the Energizer. So you might get lucky that way. But better to not be lucky and just to do it the right way, which is to first take your hot wire out a good distance away, at least 50 feet, 100 feet, into a new grounding system. And from there, the hot cable can keep going off to your tree and off to your chickens and off to your compost, and you can just link them all up however you want. And here we go, the ground is connected to the fence again. So there you go. There's the bells and whistles with your lightning diverter in place. Highly recommended. Okay, we're reaching the end. I just want to throw out a few pictures of fences. Here's the deer fence in action or around a garden. Easy up, easy down, and maintenance is easy too. You can mow right under that thing, which is nice. Mowing fences that are up for a while is a good idea with the netting. Otherwise, the weed load will start taking it down. Grazing that fence and moving it, because a grazing is of course even better. 3D fence, this is one I've hoped to see people trying. I don't actually have a need for it, so I haven't tried it myself. I'd like to see if it could be useful for elk. Certainly I know people have reported great success with a 3D fence. What it is 2 fences spaced about 3 feet apart, where the first fence is the one that you bait and the first one that they encounter and the one that they are likely to first get shocked on, so that they know that it's a shocking fence. Normally then a deer will look at the fence and think about jumping over the fence or crawling under. But when they see this other fence behind, it throws off the whole jumping game. That's the theory. A lot of people have claimed success. Other people have claimed not success. But I think really the key is to have the right space between. Here's one person's recipe. I don't know, worth trying. Here's the old cotton wool in a bottle cap, filled it with apple scent and a little wire, and you tie that on and get the deer to sniff it. Baiting the fence is really crucial. If you haven't baited the fence and then you're like, it doesn't work because the animals went right through it, I would say try again and bait the fence. Also, many times when you're setting up one of these fences, you're cutting off animal pathways. And when you're changing an animal's habit, it's really important that you're persistent. You're going to have to, bait it again, set it up again when the elk goes through and it snaps it, like put it back together. There's splicing things that you can do to fix your fence. and try again. And eventually they are getting shocked. The first, probably what happened is everybody went through, they got shocked, they ran all the way through. You're gonna have to set up the fence and try again. Your persistence will probably pay off. This is what I am told by people who have had success with lightweight, inexpensive electric fences instead of extremely expensive $8 a foot, 8-foot wildlife fences, which is kind of the only alternative. Rotational grazing. This is the classic case use of portable electric fence, often with strands on reels like that. They're fast, they're inexpensive, they're very morphable, and you can really dial in your grazing for relatively low effort, depending on what your management system here is. And again, people who do this, everyone's going to have a different way, and everyone's going to have different ideas on how to do it best, and they're all good ideas. Lots of really interesting uses out there. This is another one. I have not seen one in use yet myself. I look forward to it. But the rolling fence. I have never raised pigs myself, but know plenty of people who have and raised them in this way. The classic 2 strands of electric fence is well known. Some people use 3 strands. You could also get the expensive netting fences, but the strands seem to work really well. There's the old Joel Salatin method where he wraps, I believe it's nylon twine around tree trunks and then just uses tension and zigzags through the woods to get up 2 strands. One has to be down at snuffling height and one just needs to be up at snout height. And apparently it works like a charm. Make sure it's hot. I have bush-grazed goats for 14 years doing things like this. Random fence lines through the bush. It takes me about an hour or 2 to fence an acre, and then that acre will last, you know, a small herd for a couple of weeks when it's full of nice green vegetation. I found it very effective. I recommend having something like a frame pack to carry the rolls around, and a lot of patience for the 2 weeks that it would take to become very proficient at being able to pull netting through twigs and sticks like this. Poultry, also, I've had great success with poultry. Again, feathers insulate, so small holes are good, but this is very, very effective. I've seen dogs take 3 runs at this fence, getting shocked every time, and it took them 3 runs before they decided not to go. It's why you need to have sometimes a physical component. I first started keeping chickens and ducks behind strand fence, and it worked fine for them. But what it didn't work fine for were the neighborhood dogs, and I had a neighborhood dog. They don't respect something that they can go right through, and they're not sticking around long enough for the pulse to hit them. They just blast right through, kill a chicken, and blast right through with the chicken in their jaws. So I only need to see that once before I realized the importance of having a certain physical component to keep, especially domestic dogs out. Creative fences. Here's one that I'm not sure who it might apply to, but I had a problem with weasels taking my poultry chickens. My broilers. And so I just wove poly tape through these plastic net fences, and I did it so that there would be a slight overlap of plastic on the ground, and 2 inches off was going to be that poly tape. And I never had a weasel kill again. I'd been having a lot of weasel kills, and then the weasel kills stopped. So I would like to say that worked. I combine it with netting fence here, and that keeps out all the bears. Never had trouble with coyotes, bears, cougars, or anybody. And that's all I have for the presentation. But we got plenty of time to talk now.
And I bought 1-inch PVC electrical conduit because the white PVC pipe doesn't last as long in the sun, but the gray conduit stuff, it's also heavier. And then I made slits in it and put the wire in on it and then attach those to the tree. So now I have the post and the insulator all in one. And it's worked. I mean, I've only put it in this last fall, but it's just works super good and it's cheap, relatively speaking.
Absolutely. Making them out of PVC. What I have also found though is white PVC for sure definitely degrades. The gray or the conduit stuff definitely lasts longer. Polyethylene is much superior for lasting.
When I redid the fence, There's a couple spots on it that I have the black poly. And when I was having the trouble with the getting shocked in the house, I called up Premier One, talked to the guy. He was extremely helpful, spent a long time talking to me on the phone, and said, oh, the black poly has carbon in it and it conducts. He said, we ordered a whole bunch of insulators made by a company that made stuff for them that were made out of the black poly. We sold them, and people's fences were not working right. They were grounding out. And he said, so we got rid of all those, and he says, don't use it.
Uh, Interesting. I will be on the lookout for that one because I haven't had that. I haven't encountered that issue.
Yeah, well, I hadn't either, but that was, what he said.
That's good. Good to know.
His explanation was it's black because they put carbon in it. And that carbon is obviously a good conductor, and that's why it doesn't work. I mean, it works, but
well, I'm gonna do some experiments with that. That's interesting because I've also found certain plastic fences do conduct, and not all of them do. Where I've noticed that there's a shock, like a connection between like I put some plastic deer netting up, and found that this plastic deer netting was able to conduct. So I've definitely found issues with plastic conducting in the past. So definitely worth experimenting. I got a whole bunch of cheap yellow insulators about 12 years ago. And yeah, some of these are breaking down and snapping. But the stuff that I've got from Premier One that was, possibly it costs a bit more, but I've not had any trouble with that falling apart over time. It's lasted. And the same with the poly wire and the poly tapes. I'm using netting that I've used all summer long, every summer for 14 years, pulling it through this kind of bush and laying it on the ground and picking it up and pulling on it when it's stuck on a stick. And I've definitely abused it. And yet it still is holding up really well and hasn't been a problem. So I do find that there are quality products out there and that it's worth it for me. Like I wouldn't be able to do what I do with the smooth wire. So there's a time and a place. Of course, it is going to break down, and that smooth wire is forever. So that is an excellent point. If you're putting up a permanent fence, there's probably just no better way than a high tensile smooth wire fence.
Then the other piece that you mentioned was, of course, elk, and we have the 8-foot page wire wildlife fences. But last winter, the elk took them out too. The herd hit the fence hard enough that they snapped the posts and went right over it, and the cattle ended up in the field, and it was it was a bit of a chore to try and figure out what to do with that in the dead of winter with frozen ground. So if there's something that we could add that would convince the elk to get lost, that would be wonderful.
No kidding. Yeah, that it sounds like, well, it sounds like a bit of a disaster, but it also sounds like a good opportunity to put on high tensile on the outside of that fence. People often add a like high tensile electric. It's not that expensive to add a strand. It's just a matter of putting up insulators and pulling the wire around. There are cases where people do that also to prevent cows from rubbing on a fence. So where cows are taking fences down because they're always scratching on them, you throw up a strand of electric and you can train them out of that habit. Yeah, that's a tough one though. Boy, if that's some serious elk pressure that they're taking down 8-foot wildlife fence.
Yeah, I think they just hit it hard enough that they snap it, and then there's enough of them, enough force that the whole herd just, kind of stampedes over it. But it happened twice, and so far this winter we've been okay. But yeah, there's no predicting those things.
We've got all our internal fences around the hayfields. We've gone around the circumference of each hayfield with single strand high tensile wire, 12 and a half gauge. It's great. When the elk do hit it, they can break some posts off and take it down, but it's a pretty easy job to get it standing back up and working again. We've found that once the cows have been trained to that electric fence, until they start rubbing on it again, as you mentioned, to discover that all of a sudden it's not hot. They'll respect it for days, if not weeks, even if it's dead. So, which makes life a whole lot easier. Those cows usually are where you can find them where you left them, usually. We also, once those cows, another benefit to it is once those cows are trained to that electric fence, we can set up electric fence enclosures with poly wire on range unit to catch our cows. So as an example, our range unit uh, doesn't have any serviceable fences on it. All we're depending on is timber barriers and rivers to hold our cows in. So when we come to catch the cows in the fall, we can actually bring them into an area, put them in an electric fence that we can set up within an hour or two and hold them there until we can get panels set up. And all of a sudden we've got our cows caught and we're not riding or looking for cows for days and weeks on end if we can't hold them, which is a big benefit once those cows are set up and or trained to that electric fence.
So Rick, you're training them on high tensile, but then they
Yeah,
respect the electric rope or the
yeah,
electric wire?
yeah, yeah. So we do a bit of pretty intensive rotational grazing before and after we had for range. Last year, as a matter of fact, we had some extra grass land in our laps, and we didn't even go out to our range unit. So we're moving cows almost daily, no more than 3 days in a paddock. And all the cows respect that electric fence more than they do either a rail or a plank fence. I've never seen a cow jump over one of our electric fences, but I've seen cows crush panels and corral fences trying to go over top. So that once that wire is hot and those cows get zotted a time or two, they respect it. We've never had an issue. We've never even had issues with bulls leaving a paddock to get to a cow in heat. They just they don't want to do it.
So Rick, you've obviously had success and not
Mhm.
everybody does. What do you attribute uh, your success to?
Well, that's easy. Voltage. If that wire is hot when they hit it, they won't come back. So, but as you mentioned, there's two components to that. So you can have 6,000 or 7,000 volts on that fence with your tester. And if it's dry, as Frank mentioned earlier, once you've got into the rocks and you're into August, at 7,000 volts in my Blundstone boots, I can hang on to that fence if it's that dry. We had bears getting in the apiary last summer because of that. The tester said 7,000 volts. And once the bear was in, I was wondering how did she get in there, grab hold of the fence, and it's just kind of a tingle. Didn't even slow her down. Yeah. And she was right on her belly, crawling under that bottom hot wire. So she was as grounded as she was going to get. Um, so in those situations, then we just depend on previous training with the cattle. If they don't want to touch that fence, they won't. Yeah.
Would you consider putting out a ground wire and throwing
Yes.
ground rods or a
Yep.
positive negative,
Yep.
especially around a
Yep.
high value item like your apiary, I
Yep.
suppose?
Yep. Yep. Definitely. But she went under the bottom wire. So she would have bypassed any um, alternation of hot and cold or positive and negative wires going up that fence.
Right.
She didn't
I
go
have
between the two
seen
wires.
I where was this? I feel like I saw it with parks where they actually put a metal uh, almost like chicken wire
Yep.
on the ground and made that ground and then a low ground wire. So if you did try and crawl, you'd at least you'd have
Yes.
you'd be between
Yes.
metal and hot.
And I think if we didn't redo the fence or our grounding system, that's where we would have ended up. We would have just had to have done something different because the original fence just wasn't working.
So you have redone your grounding system then, and that's made a big difference.
Yes, I put in more ground rods. Put the ground rods underneath where our water trough or one of the troughs are. So they're permanently wet. And then I just run the sprinkler over top of the apiary every now and then. And it
So
seemed to make a
you
difference.
don't anticipate this like voltage but no shock situation again.
Yeah, yeah. Simply because that light switch that you were talking about, as you or the animal being the light switch, in our case, the ground was being the switch and it was never being closed.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, that's interesting. So where was it actually reading 7,000 volts? Was it reading 7,000 volts
Yep.
when you're right there at the apiary?
Right at the apiary.
With one of those
Right
push
there.
button testers.
I've got a Gallagher tester that said 7,000 volts.
And I wonder if it would be the same if it was with one of the old school like light testers with a ground
It
spike.
probably wouldn't have been.
That's what I'm wondering because
Yeah,
that's
it
where
probably.
like the blitz lights, like the ones that blink when it's over
Yep.
4,000 volts, that might be a good thing for people in dry conditions
Yep. Yep.
to because it's a kind of it's a different physics that gives you the
Mhm.
voltage.
So I think the light volts are reading current, where the Gallagher would be reading an inductive field.
Frank,
Yeah.
do you have thoughts on that? Because it sounds like you've struggled with the same issue.
I do have the same issue. What my solution has been, like I said, to alternate the wires, and I can't even say that that helped or not because we haven't had any trouble, but maybe I think the critters are just have learned to ignore it or to stay away from it, and they don't even try. So, and that was one thing I was going to say. If you know, ours is for an orchard, mostly an orchard and garden. Not for animals, although we do have chickens, but um, it's always, if the animals are used to coming in and then you put your electric fence up, it's less likely to work.
Hmm.
It's much better to, so if you're going to be planting an orchard, let's say, or even putting in a new garden, put the fence up first, then put your orchard in, because once they get used to coming in, they'll just keep trying. I mean, hopefully they'd get shocked enough they'd learn, but you know, this is not from experience. This is just common sense that critters are going to keep coming. The other thing that we did was put our fence in, I mean, we're in the woods basically. So we put the fence in the woods instead of right next to the orchard. So if it's next to the orchard, the critter can see, oh, it's like nice, good green stuff to eat there. I'm going to stick my head through and try to eat it. Whereas here, it looks the same on one side of the fence as the other, right? And it doesn't, there's no underbrush to speak of. So the critters are not going to be tempted to try to get through because there's nothing close to the fence to try to get into. And I don't know how much that's helped, but it certainly has helped. Certainly we've had not much of a problem. We knew some other people in I guess it was Crescent Valley, who had goats, and they had electric fence, and they had a gate, and their gate was a piece of rope, because the goats had learned to be scared of the fence so much that all they needed was a piece of rope, and they wouldn't even go. They just wouldn't go to that goat.
We do that all the time, Frank, with horses.
Yeah.
The saddle horses we have or had were all broke to electric fence too. So we could break up, as an example, our road with pieces of twine across from fence to fence, 40 feet across the road right of way. And that's all it took. To move the horses up and down the road was really quite easy. Didn't have to even light up a fence for it.
Yeah, it's amazing how scared they are. Dogs the same, you know,
Yeah.
the dog
Well,
touches
we've
that
had
fence.
lots of, well, I shouldn't say lots, but especially last summer, and that piece of grass that had fell on our lap, the landowner's dog came along and touched the fence as we were moving it. We didn't see him for about 3 weeks afterwards. He squealed all the way home. This little piggy. Yeah.
Oh dear, poor dog.
Yeah.
I was gonna say, does anybody have experience? Because like I said, I just put up the new fence, and we've got a rail fence that we made that's inside of it, that's used to have our old fence, electric fence in front of that, right connected to it. But now the wooden fence is still standing, but in the process of getting to its end of its life. And I'm wondering if the fence, which is about well, it's almost 5 feet tall, the electric fence that we put up now. It's 6 strands, 6 or 7. But I'm wondering whether the deer are going to potentially jump over it if there's no
Yes.
wooden fence behind it to make them,
Yes.
you know. So have you had
Yes.
experience with that happening?
Short answer is yes.
Even though they were trained?
Short answer is yes.
No.
We see Lavona has mentioned the 3D fences, as Andrew did. Andrew and I, speaking several years ago, actually had me all wound up to try a 3D fence. And we copied that one from the Peace River Forage Association around a market garden we had going at that time. Shortly thereafter, I watched a 4 or 5 point bull elk clear that fence. He was on the run when he cleared it. He didn't walk up to it and just hop over, but he did come halfway across the field and over the fence, didn't touch it at all. So yeah, they might work for deer, but I wouldn't trust them for elk at all. Yeah.
I don't know. We'll see. I'll let the fence stand, the wooden fence stand as long as it can, but I don't, it's a big job. It's all made out of, wooden rails, wooden trees, and it was a lot of work to make, and it's getting to its life.
Like, as Corey was mentioning there, if the elk want in, they're coming in.
Yeah.
Corey's
I wonder if I just put a wire higher up, doesn't even have to be electric, just a wire, up at, I don't know, maybe 6 feet.
I don't know the answer to that.
I
think
have
the only way to
seen,
keep them out is
I have many times seen the deer do the flying compact leap where they go between strands.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Like I say, we had the wooden fence, and they're probably 8 inches maybe between rails, and we hadn't finished the fence. We were just building it. This was many years ago, and 3 deer got in because it was just wide open, and I went and tried to chase them to go out, and it was just unbelievable how they just put their legs out and dove through this 8-inch gap. The fur came off right on the fence. There was all this fur there, but they managed through that. Yeah, 2 of them did, and then the littlest one just kept running back and forth trying to figure out how to get out. But it was unbelievable how they took that chance and went through. So yeah, I know that they can do it.
Yeah, they got to be afraid of it. The psychological aspect of these fences is more important than the physical, even. So,
Right.
Yeah.
What do you think? Rick, it sounds like after seeing that bull elk perform amazing acrobatics, it sort of swore you off. But if the fences were higher and further apart, would it
Maybe,
make a difference?
maybe. But that Peace River one that they're talking about there, they talk about seeing moose tracks on the outside of the fence. but I don't know that it's going to work in our part of the world. I think if those elk want in, the only thing that's going to keep them out is a physical barrier um, with posts that are fresh or pipe or I don't know. Yeah. Once you get that 100 elk pushing up against that fence and the back ones are pushing the little ones up against it, I don't know that they can even get away from it. Um, yeah,
Right.
yeah,
Right.
it might work. I'd sure give it a try.
I Yeah, that's where I would say sure give it a try. I'm thinking of your situation there, Corey. Like you've already got an 8 foot wildlife fence. It's cheap insurance if it does work.
Yeah,
So
yeah,
inexpensive to run
yeah.
a cable around.
But you're not the only one, Corey, that has mentioned that exact same behavior with the elk.
Yeah,
Um,
I mean the guys down around Fort Steele and down in the South Country are tearing their hair out, but
Tyler told me the same story.
yeah, yeah, I'm not
Yeah,
surprised.
yeah.
What
That,
height would you put a hot wire then if you were going to try it? How high up would you put it?
well, they're going to be leading with their snout.
Yeah.
But when you think of how an elk moves around, their nose is 6 feet off the ground.
Mm.
Think about the last time the elk ran through on a trot. Their heads are way up in the air.
Mhm.
So this is just me guessing, I'd put it down around 3.5 or 4 feet, a meter 10. That way, maybe touch them on the shoulder.
I was thinking the shoulder would be a good height because they're likely
Yeah,
to not even notice it.
yeah,
If they're in a big herd, I mean, baiting it is still probably worthwhile, but they can still
mhm,
reach it at shoulder height.
yeah,
If I were only putting in one, that would probably be a good guess, I'd say.
yeah. Because when you think about how those elk move across the country, their heads are way up in the air, especially if they're a little wound up, and if they're up against a fence and they're excited trying getting in, their heads are going to be up. Yeah,
So maybe up
it's
high as well.
maybe, maybe, and I don't know that maybe bait would work, but what would you bait the elk with? I'm not sure. Peanut butter? I don't know.
Yeah, peanut butter is probably the most likely to work.
Yeah,
Mhm.
Works for pack rats and elk.
Yeah,
Yeah.
just about everything.
yeah. Well, apple scent, they make that stuff. The packaged apple scent probably does
Mhm.
the trick.
I know it doesn't smell like anything though. Well, or very little. Doesn't smell like apple, that's for sure.
Yeah,
But it seems to work. That's what we use.
yeah. I've always just actually stuffed a piece of apple in the cap, but then it rots out. But it lasts for as long as you need it.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Well, that's something I learned tonight. I've never heard of baiting fences, so that's a new trick.
Yeah, we often hear about baiting electric fences around, quote, a calving yard, unquote, to try to keep coyotes and wolves out. But in my experience, mama cow is a better coyote repellent than any electric fence.
You know, like I said, we use those little caps that you showed in the thing.
Mhm.
And every month we just automatically go and put a couple of drops of the apple scent on.
Mm.
And I mean, I've never seen them come and sample it, but some reason something's working.
Oh, the other
Absolutely.
thing I wrote down too, Andrew, um, the sparking at night, et cetera, et cetera. I attended a seminar elsewhere on electric fencing, and I used the term burning through your weeds. And
Mm,
it was in the middle of a hot August afternoon. And I was corrected to say that no, you're not really burning through your weeds. You are disrupting cell walls in the plant so that it actually browns off.
yeah, it does
Yeah.
brown off. I feel very bad for those plants. I'm like, oh,
Yes.
looks like that was rough.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, but no forest fires, so that's good.
No
So
forest
far,
fires.
I've
No.
I've heard no reports of anybody ever causing a fire with a properly installed
No.
fence. So
No.
knock on wood, that remains the case. I don't see why it would even likely happen.
I noticed with when I did buy a new fencer quite a few years ago. Well, it was after the bear got in, and I realized the old one was just old. And since then, even when it's raining and there's all kinds of plants touching, all kinds of grass and bushes and everything. They're just touching the fence everywhere. And I would figure, there's no way this is going to work. But I go out with a tester, it's doing just fine. There's the fencer itself has lights on it too. It's got like 5 little lights that show how strong it is. And it's, no matter how wet it is and stuff, it's still out on the highest power. So that fencer's been great. It's a Speed Right 3000, which I'm not doing a big area. It's probably maybe an acre.
That's great though. 3 joules for a place your size sounds great. Lots of extra juice and
yeah.
Lots of
you know,
power
that's
there.
something I didn't mention, but I do have brand loyalty. If it's like Staffix or Speedrite or Gallagher, one of those names, I feel way more confident that it's gonna work well. The only one that is not in those group that I've also enjoyed and continue to use, I got one 12 years ago and it still works great, is Argus. The Argus
Oh,
4000. I don't know who made it. It's a German company though.
hmm.
Great one.
Well, as strange as it sounds, I think in electric fencing, like everything else, you get exactly what you pay for. So if you go cheap, you're going to get cheap. You know, if you're going to spend a little bit of money on it, it's probably worthwhile in the long run, unless Mr. Lightning comes along and eats your fencer.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Don't let Mr. Lightning eat your fencer.
He doesn't care if it's cheap or expensive.
That's it. Do you use a lightning diverter, Rick?
I haven't.
No.
No.
Well,
Short
Neither have
answer is
I.
no.
Yeah, I haven't either.
Yeah. Just
I live up on top of a hill, so I'm a little bit more prone, maybe.
yeah.
Maybe we just lucked out so far. That's all.
Maybe.
I've lost one, but
Oh yeah, to lightning.
yeah, to lightning,
Okay.
yes.
Well,
Yeah.
there you go. So I mean, the lightning diverter costs $7.50, and the
Yeah, I'm in
rods
the
are
yeah,
$2 a
yeah,
piece.
yeah. I'm underwater on that one, shall we say?
Yeah.
Yeah. Hmm.
Well, thanks so much. I don't want to
Okay.
keep everybody too late. I'd happily talk all
Okay.
night, but thank you so much to everyone who came out, and I will put a video together in the next week or so and send it out. And if you think of anything, please let me know, and look forward to hearing more from all of you.
Okay. Good night, Andrew. Good night,
Thanks.
everyone.
Thanks,
Good night, Rick.
everybody.